breaking news, coming on the air with some breaking news. The Dallas Cowboys have traded Micah Parsons to the Green Bay Packers for defensive tackle Kenny Clark and two first round picks. So, yeah, that's the big news of the day. Um, I do know that there are reports that the Falcons were in on Michael Parsons, and that according to Jeff Benedict, that they just did not have the package to compete with what the Packers were offering. And they also gave Parsons a very big contract extension, which makes him the highest paid non quarterback in NFL history. So that that's the spill for what else is going on around around the league. Um, but anyways, what's going on, everybody? What's going on? Happy Thursday! Almost the weekend. Almost Labor Day weekend. College football starts this weekend. Who's ready for college football this weekend? I know. Some of y'all got to be ready for college football. Hell, some of y'all enjoy college more than y'all do the NFL. So I know y'all are definitely excited for it. But listen, I'm excited for college this week, and I'm excited to have football back. Anyone who knows me, as I say, y'all know I love football, so I'm just excited to have it back. But the Falcons did finalize their 53-man roster this past Tuesday at 4 o'clock. The Falcons finalized their initial 53-man roster for the 2025 season. And I was going to come live last night, but I had some other things pop up that prevented me from doing so. So I know I'm a few days late talking about it, but want to still want to discuss some of the decisions made for the initial 53-man roster. And I say initial because obviously the roster is going to change, and the roster has changed. So yeah, we're getting ready to talk about this, but as y'all know, before we get started, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share it out. Of course, that Cash App is down there. If you'd be so kind to send a couple dollars, just you'd be kind to do so. But let, let's get this thing started. Let's look at this roster we have. The initial Falcons roster, I think there's a big emphasis on that. Preseason is officially over. The Atlanta Falcons initial roster for the 2025 regular season dropped Tuesday at the NFL's 4 p.m. Eastern deadline. The offense features 24 players, the defense has 25, and special teams has 3. That puts the team at 52 of a possible 53 players. So, let's take a look at it, starting with quarterback. The Falcons are going into the season rostering 2 quarterbacks. Michael Penix, obvious QB1, and then Kirk Cousins will serve as the backup. And this isn't shocking because I think some maybe thought Easton Stick would make it onto the 53, but it really makes no sense for the Falcons to carry Easton Stick on the 53-man roster because he will be dressing as the emergency third quarterback regardless, even if he's on the practice squad. So there's really no reason for the Falcons to carry him on the 53-man roster, especially if he'll still be able to be dressed out on game days and serve as that emergency quarterback, which is all that he would essentially be, without even being on the roster. You wouldn't that would essentially be wasting a roster spot. So makes sense why the Falcons are just carrying two quarterbacks. Falcons are carrying three running backs: Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, and Nathan Carter. And I think this was becoming more and more apparent that Nathan Carter would be the guy to make it out of that running back room. He is the one who stood out the most in preseason to serve as that number three running back. The Falcons released Jace McClellan actually released him a little bit back, and Carlos Washington, who did not make the 53-man roster, was waived. Elijah Dotson, he was waived. So, based off the fact that he did stand out most in preseason, it made sense as to why Nathan Carter will serve as that um, number three back behind Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. Kind of the first noteworthy thing, the Falcons are carrying seven wide receivers this season. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Ray Ray McLeod, Kadero Hodge. Those I think are the four gimmies. Casey Washington, who really had an impressive camp and kind of went in maybe on the bubble, but pretty early into camp and preseason, especially after the injury to Darnell Mooney, which we got some news on him today. Um, Pretty much locked up a roster spot, and then Jamal Agnew, who just came out today, will actually serve as the Falcons' primary returner this season. Um, he had some injury issues in camp, so I think there was maybe some uncertainty on whether the Falcons would keep him or not. But he is, apparently going to now serve a pretty important role on this team. And then David Sills making as that last wide receiver, and it was between him, it was between Chris Blair, it was between Nick Nash. Those two guys now on our practice squad. Nick Nash made a strong case with his final preseason game in Dallas, despite being sidelined somewhat training camp and preseason, and then also Chris Blair, he had some standout moments. I believe he actually led all wide receivers in yards in the preseason, but the Falcons felt more comfortable rolling with the veteran, which you got to understand. So David Sills does make it onto the initial roster. Now, this is kind of the first thing that shocks me. The Falcons are carrying four tight ends this season: Kyle Pitts and Charlie Warner, the obvious two. Um, they're going to carry Tegan Quatoriano, and I think we're all tired of seeing this guy on the roster, but Felipe Franks is back for another run, and I can't say I'm the biggest fan of it because I'm not a fan of it at all, but I do think that hopefully, because Felipe Franks is the number four tight end, we're not having to see much of him at all. But I'm shocked that the Falcons are carrying four tight ends because I think, as we all know, the tight end position is really not that important in this offense, at least in the passing game aspect. Charlie Warner is a really valuable piece to the blocking game, and of course, Kyle position elsewhere, but of course, it is just the initial roster, but that was kind of one of the first things that really stood out to me. I was kind of shocked that we're carrying four tight ends. But moving over to the offensive line, and maybe this actually plays a part into why we are carrying four tight ends. For the offensive line, Jake Matthews, Matthew Bergeron, Ryan Newsel, Chris Lindstrom, Elijah Wilkinson, Jack Nelson, Jovan Gwynn, and Kyle Hinton, all listed as the 8 offensive linemen on this roster. There's obviously one name missing, that is Caleb McGarry, because Caleb McGarry's season is over. He went on season-ending IR, and in those first 4 weeks, and the Falcons have made some moves with the offensive line. They traded with the Seahawks for offensive tackle I believe Michael Jarrell, and they also signed Warren from the Jets to their practice squad. And I believe they actually made another um, signing as well today, in that the Falcons signed Ryan Hayes, offensive tackle, 6'7", 305 pounds. They signed him today to the practice squad. So they have rostered a lot of offensive linemen on this practice squad, but there really isn't, I think, a clear option that you're comfortable with to fill in for Caleb McGarry until Storm Norton comes back. Honestly, I think the Falcons should have just sucked it up and signed a veteran. I think you'd rather be safe than sorry. Or I also think that, and I did see that Raheem Morris said it was a possibility and something they discussed of moving Matthew Bergeron to right tackle, which if you didn't sign a veteran, that's honestly what I would have done. And then I would have played Elijah Wilkinson at left guard. But it seems like at this point, Elijah Wilkinson is the front runner to be Michael Penix's blindside blocker, be our right tackle come week one, which I cared about because I'm not. But luckily for Tampa, and we're going to be talking all about it next week because week one is next Sunday, September 7th. Tampa is dealing with a lot of injuries. Tristan Wirfs will be out week one. Chris Godwin will be out week one. And Outside Otten will be out week one. So Tampa is definitely beaten up also, but it's just beyond Tampa. Those first four games, it's going to be rough if you're having to put trust in Elijah Wilkinson at right tackle. Now, I will say the Falcons do have one of the best offensive line coaches in the NFL in Dwayne Ledford, and he has definitely been essential in a lot of these guys' development, but there's just some guys that you really can't trust to. You can only do so much with it. Elijah Wilkinson, for a lot of his career, has really been just one of those guys you can only do so much with. So, definitely not encouraging to hear, but it's the unfortunate circumstance, and regardless of what happens, it's a next man up sport. Moving over to the defensive side of the ball, the Falcons are carrying 5 defensive linemen: David Onyemata, Brandon Dorless, Lykel London, Rukaroro, and Zach Harrison. Not shocked by this at all. Figured these would be our five defensive linemen. Um, Definitely can understand why they're carrying Lykel London on the roster. Of course, not Drake London, but Lykel London, because the Falcons do need a big boy up front, and you know they also need someone with a little bit of weight and um and that frame. And really, none of these guys I think you would really just say are a true 320-pound nose tackle that I think you would prefer having. But you got a lot of these around the 290 range. But once again, you need guys, you need bodies up front that can really just eat blocks so that you can let the guys that we're going to talk about next, these edge rushers, get free and fly around. Speaking of the edge rushers that the Falcons are carrying on this roster, Arnold Ebiketie, Leonard Floyd, our 2 first-round picks, Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr., Braylon Trice, who we just got some news on today, and D'Angelo Malone, are edge rushers that we're carrying. But you can really scratch Braylon Trice's name because he is also heading to IR. Not season-ending IR as of yet, but apparently he re-aggravated the knee that he injured last year. And I'm going to be honest, it really seems like, and I hate it for Braylon Trice, because he was honestly supposed to be that guy coming out last year that could have had an impact. But it seems like due to his ability to just not be on the field, seems like Braylon Trice, unfortunately, he might be a bust. It may not work out due to his. And listen, your best ability is your availability at the end of the day. If you can't be out on that field, there's really not much else you can do. So even when Braylon Trice is back, he's probably not going to be getting a whole lot of reps because you're going to have all these other guys out there. I would also probably expect Lee Kareem, who is back on our practice squad. He could potentially, even though he was not signed today with Braylon Trice going on IR, I would probably expect that we will see him on this roster at some point. Inside linebackers, Caden Ellis, Divine Diablo, JD Bertrand, and Josh Woods. Um, I believe Troy Anderson was placed on the PUP, the physically unable to perform list. So that is why we don't necessarily see him at this point in time. Josh Woods does make the roster after getting a lot of opportunities in the preseason. The Falcons do give him an initial roster spot. So, obviously, the other three not shocked one bit to see. Corner. Now, pretty interesting here with, some of the labeling. A.J. Terrell, Mike Hughes, Clark Phillips, D. Alford, Mike Ford Jr., and Natron Brooks. Natron Brooks finally makes the 53-man roster in his third year here. And Billy Bowman Jr. is listed as a corner. Now, he is going to be the starting nickel. This is some other news. Raheem Morris held a press conference today. We got a lot of news out of it. Some of the biggest news. We are officially going to be seeing 4 out of our 5 picks from this year's draft class starting week 1, all on the defensive side of the ball. Jalen Walker, James Pierce Jr., Xavier Watts, Billy Bowman Jr., all going to be starting. And listen, I'm really happy to see that because even though, yes, these guys are going to take their lumps, they are rookies and you want to invest into them. You want to future this defense. And the fact that you feel confident in these guys taking starting positions week 1, that makes me really happy to see. But they are labeling Billy Bowman as a corner. For a while, he was labeled coming out as a safety, but now he is obviously labeled as a corner. He will be starting in that nickel over D. Alford, which I for one, can definitely say that I agree with. I do not want to see D. Alford out there starting again this season. So, it is interesting that he is labeled though as a corner, even though we all knew he was going to be that nickel. But the fact that they're officially listing him as a corner and not as a safety. Speaking of safeties, Jesse Bates, Xavier Watson, DeMarco Helms, the 3 safeties on this roster. Xavier Watts will be starting alongside Jesse Bates. Jordan Fuller did not make the initial 53, even though he is now back. So the Falcons really now have 4 safeties on this roster again. We're at least going to talk about how they categorize it. And the 3 specialists, Younghoe Koo, officially did win his job back. Bradley Pinion and long snapper Liam McCall, they so that is was the initial 53-man roster. Some of the guys released: Jordan Fuller, who is now back with the team; Ronnie Harrison, C.J. Henderson, which is now back on our practice squad; Khalid Kareem, Brandon Parker, Easton Stick, and Tavius. All these guys back on our practice squad. And matter of fact, looking at the injury reserve right now, Caleb McGarry on that injury reserve, Troy Anderson on the physically unable to perform list. And let's see. So the Falcons signed safety Jordan Fuller to the 53-man roster. We already talked about that. Xavier Watts and Billy Bowman to start week 1. Let's look at this for a second. Raheem Morris detailing options for the Falcons at right tackle this for the start of this season, which is going to be very important early on, as I think we all know. Let's see. Despite the team picking up new faces, Raheem Morris said it would be hard for those individuals to serve players who spent training camp. Um, so all this we know. The first name to know here is Elijah Wilkinson. So I can probably say that based on everything that we're Carter Bourne and Ryan Hayes both on the practice squad. So here's what I'll say about first of all about our 53 man roster. I was obviously shocked to see we're carrying four tight ends, but I kind of think that probably changed after hearing the injury news regarding Caleb McGarry and Storm Norton. And I really think that definitely factors in a lot now on where you're going to go. But if you are taking this tackle by committee, that's a very dangerous position, I think, to put your franchise quarterback in and put your team in, because right tackle is not just one of those positions like for instance a defensive lineman or your edge rushers even. Your offensive line is one of the most, especially your blindside blocker, might actually be the second most important position on your whole team outside of quarterback. So you can't just go by committee on that. You're going to have to land on a guy, and you're going to have to ride with that guy until Storm Norton comes back. And whether it's Elijah Wilkinson or whether it's a guy that you just signed to the practice squad, whether it is, I don't see a case that Jack Nelson would have based off the preseason that he had, Brandon Parker. So it looks like it's going to be Elijah Wilkinson. And he's definitely, I don't think he is a good option at all, but he's really, from him, it only gets worse. So that's the situation that you're in. And like I say, with Penix's injury history and all the other things to consider, that we are down to our third string tackle entering week one, it's definitely not a great position to be in. But does it mean that the season is over? No, of course not. But it does mean that the Falcons are definitely going to have to proceed with this thing one game at a time. But you also cannot have this be a revolving door. You're going to have to really set in stone on a guy, and Dwayne Ledford is going to have to go to work and prove why he is one of the best offensive line coaches in the entire league. But the Bucks are also entering, as I mentioned earlier, week one very beaten up, and I can go ahead and probably say, because I'm going to be talking about it a lot. Tampa, at the end of the day, entering week one, I think is probably more vulnerable than us, because number one, it being at home, I think gives us the advantage. And I also believe that at the end of the day, when you slice it down the middle, neither of these teams, because I know there's people who like to make a big deal out of starters playing in the preseason and thinks that that dictates how a team's performance goes. And let me go ahead and say that's not the case. However, with everything I just said, let's talk about it. Neither of these teams played their starters in preseason. Michael Penix didn't play in preseason. Baker Mayfield didn't play in preseason. So, you got to consider that. The Falcons have had Zach Robinson as offensive coordinator now for a full year. And Michael only started 3 games, has started games. He has had experience with this offense. The Falcons had some joint practices this preseason and training camp against the Tennessee Titans before that second preseason game. And they also run probably the most 11 on 11 in practice in the whole league. So, those are some things to consider. Tampa, new offensive coordinator, third offensive coordinator in 3 years now. And At the end of the day, the Bucks and every team in the NFL operates off of luck, but the Bucks have been operating off of a lot of luck going their way over the past few years. And I'm going to go ahead and say the likelihood of three offensive coordinators hitting for Baker Mayfield in a row is pretty slim. So I'm Tampa. I think when they get healthy, yes, they're definitely going to be competition. They're definitely the team we are competing for in the division. Is basically limping into Week 1 with a new offensive coordinator and a quarterback who hasn't played in preseason, hasn't played since January, just like our guy. I think there is a lot of reason to favor the Falcons in the matchup, but we're going to talk about next week. Um, Obviously, the Michael Parsons news was the big news coming out of today. But I do want to say before I get out of here, Sunday night, I am going to be going live and doing the schedule prediction for this year, and I hope to be joined by some special guests. Still trying to get some confirmation, but I hope to be joined by maybe two special guests who are going to come on and we're going to predict the schedule. We're going to let y'all know what we think the Falcons are going to do this year. And I'm going to continue to stick by it. This is a crap or get off the pot year for the Atlanta Falcons. It's a position to where you really kind of have to make the playoffs because Terry Fontenot, I can almost assure you, is not going to get another year if he misses the playoffs for 5 straight years. And Raheem Morris as well. He's not going to get another season if the Falcons once again fall short of their goals. With that being said, I will see you all Sunday night. I will see you all a lot in the next week because week 1 is right around the corner. Didn't plan on this being a long live today. Just wanted to hop on and talk about the 53-man roster and talk about some of the other news that has came out. Schedule predictions Sunday night. I also plan on putting out a video on Monday. I think what I'm going to do this year is I'm going to put out a NFL season prediction, who I think is going to win each division, who I think is making the playoffs, and who I think is going to win the Super Bowl. I think I'm going to do that on Monday, and then starting later in the week, we're going to start talking about the matchup that we have with Tampa week 1. Anyways, with all that being said, appreciate you all for the support. Remember, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share it out. I will see you all in the next